The Memphis Grizzlies losing streak ended on Sunday night with a victory over the Indiana Pacers. A 5-game skid has come to a conclusion. Memphis hopefully is getting things back together. But before we could talk about any of that, the winning or the losing, there is apparently something called Reddit, where somebody can say something really dumb and people will actually think that it's worth their time. And I guess I have to talk about it here on Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Grizzlies, your team each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Again, anywhere you get podcasts, you can find Locked On Grizzlies. We are also over on YouTube. You can check us out there. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Help us continue to make Locked On Grizzlies bigger and better. I am your host for this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, Joe Mullinax, formerly of Grizzly Bear Blues, now currently a writer over at SB Nation and for Fansided. I also have a Grizzlies-specific Substack. And, of course, maybe most importantly, I am the least attractive co-host of the Locked On Grizzlies tandem. You'll notice the better-looking one, DeMichael Cole, not joining us on this episode. I'm looking forward to having him back on over the next couple of episodes, Tuesday and Wednesday, specifically heading in to the Portland Trailblazers game, able to get back in a routine as he now is home safely and excited to talk Grizzlies basketball with him consistently once again, now that the West Coast trip is over. But first, West Coast trip is over. Memphis Grizzlies win a basketball game. Those should be the things that I'm leading Locked On Grizzlies with, okay? Those should be the topics because this is a basketball program, right? This is a show where you listen in, you tune in, you watch me or DeMichael, the two of us together. You try to not get blinded by the reflection of the light off of my bald head. You like looking at DeMichael and hearing his takes. DeMichael's a very smart, very talented man. You stomach me. You're okay with me. I'm all right. You're still here in spite of me because I'm going to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies, and you like the Memphis Grizzlies. Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. Great games against the Pacers. That's what I should be talking about to start this show. But no, something happened on Twitter over the weekend that was potentially one of the dumbest things that I've ever experienced in my, not just in my coverage of the NBA, which now goes over a decade, not just in my athletic life, which now goes over, I played sports since I was a kid. It's one of the dumbest things that I've ever had to actually discuss in my entire existence on planet Earth. Apparently, there's this thing called Reddit, and it's a place where you can go and just say the dumbest crap that you want. And it kind of sounds like blogging, and maybe you've listened or followed my work over the years. And you're like, oh, well, Joe, that's just, you're writing over Grizzly Bear Blues. Touche. Words hurt, but I understand your point of view. I don't dabble in Reddit. And on Saturday, it was my son's birthday. I'm a wrestling fan. It was the Royal Rumble. My attention was diverted from Twitter for much of the day. But I went on at the end of the day for the Royal Rumble, and I saw the beginnings of these conversations, these NBA writers that are extremely well-respected, Kevin O'Connor, Kirk Goldsberry, talking about the Jaren Jackson Jr. files. I'm like, what the hell are the Jaren Jackson Jr. files? So I do a little bit of research, a little bit of digging, and there is a user on Reddit who spent a lot of time looking at Jaren Jackson Jr.'s numbers in terms of blocks, at home in particular, and declaring that something doesn't add up. Jaren is much more successful at home as a defensive basketball player than he is on the road. He is so much better defensively at FedEx Forum than he is in other places. Surely things must be off. Things must be weird. This Defensive Player of the Year campaign is a sham, said this person. Come here. Come closer. If you're listening to this in the car, just lean in. I want you right near your speaker. If you're watching on YouTube, come here. Come here. Let me see you. Let me see you. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. There's a movie called Men in Black. It came out in 1997. I was 10 years old when it debuted in theaters. I remember seeing it. And there's a line from that film that Tommy Lee Jones says that I think is just fantastic. It describes our society perfectly. I'm paraphrasing slightly. I don't want to completely misquote the film. A person can be smart. People can be dumb. The fact that this was a thing shows how dumb our society has become. Never mind the fact that these games are more scrutinized than they've ever been before in terms of social media, in terms of data being studied, in terms of people watching every angle, every aspect of what these athletes are doing on the floor. Very rarely, at least if you are covering this game, do you just sit back and go, this is a competitive game. I'm enjoying this. There is some analytical angle from everybody, myself included. I'm not innocent in that, obviously. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody wants data and facts and film and all these different things to make it seem like they're smarter than they are. Hi, me too. Yes, the NBA pulled the wool over all their eyes. And yes, this rogue scorekeeper in Memphis, taking these stats, exploiting the system, inflating the numbers for Jaren Jackson Jr. so he could be Defensive Player of the Year. It's all a complete crusade against whoever the heck it is that could win instead of Jaren. Nick Claxton, Marcus Smart, Brooke Lopez, whoever it might be. The NBA is openly trying to help the Memphis Grizzlies. Do you understand how stupid that sounds to say out loud? I just said it, and I feel like a moron. Somebody spent so much of their life devoted to this activity. Do you know how much money is bet on fantasy sports? I'm about to do an ad read for a fantasy sport. For gambling. You know how much they spend? Billions of dollars a year on the National Basketball Association. You think the NBA is willing to risk all that, throw it all away for a team that very few people outside of Memphis, Tennessee could care less about? Could care less about. That until a few years ago when Ja Morant arrived in Memphis, and I would be in my home city or my home state of Virginia talking about basketball and how I'm a Grizzlies fan, how many times people would semi-jokingly say, oh, the Grizzlies are in Memphis? And Memphis has an NBA team? That's interesting. All of a sudden, the NBA is just trying to rig the whole thing so that Jaren Jackson Jr. can be the Defensive Player of the Year. Say that out loud to yourself wherever you are, where you're listening, where you are watching. I'll wait a few seconds. Just say it out loud. You couldn't finish it because it's so stupid. It's so stupid. I am so frustrated that I had to lead today's show off with that. But I had to because it was a major topic. That was on Locked On NBA, and Jackson Gatlin said this is one of the most discussed things of the last few years in terms of the 24-hour time period where, there were major NBA minds and lots of fans. And is this really happening? Of course it's not happening. Of course it's not. It's ridiculous to even have this conversation, to have to even defend Jaren Jackson Jr. Watch a freaking Memphis Grizzlies basketball game. That's all I am asking. Instead of spending so much time staring at a blank white screen or watching film and saying, oh, did he touch that? Did he touch that ball? I'm going to dispute that. Instead of proving that you don't understand the way games are scored or that games are audited like freaking taxes every single day in terms of the accuracy of the numbers, instead of doing that, just watch the game. Just watch the dude play. And you'll see that he is one of the best, if not the best, defensive players in the NBA. And it's not that close. Nick Claxton's having a heck of a season. Brooke Lopez, Marcus Smart in the past, past winner. There are very good defensive players in the NBA. None of them can do what Jaren Jackson Jr. is doing right now. Not a single one. And the numbers aren't inflated. Get a freaking hobby, or at least one that pays you to watch basketball. Speaking of getting paid to watch basketball, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. Maybe you should take Jaren Jackson Jr. to get more than 12.5 blocks. If you're somebody that doesn't believe in the accuracy of the Memphis Grizzlies scorekeeper numbers, maybe he'll have 97.5 points and you're going to take more than that. Who knows? It's all craziness in Memphis. You're crazy if you haven't tried PrizePicks yet. It's a lot of fun. It really is. You pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any given entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you against the projections that are there. NBA, NFL's wrapping up. Major League Baseball about to get started. NHL still going. Literally every sport, or almost every sport under the sun, has projections through PrizePicks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less, safe and fast, with operations happening in over 30 states as well as in Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. When we come back, we will try to regain control and sanity of this program, and we will look at the Grizzlies finally turning the tide. How did they get the job done? How did they find a way to win and break the streak? Talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I would just like to apologize for my rant there in the first part of the show. Hopefully you're still with me, dear listener, dear viewer. I appreciate you immensely. My name is Joe Mullinax. I am the host of this program, co-host when DeMichael Cole is with me of the Memphis Commercial Appeal. He'll be back tomorrow, thankfully, and he can hopefully rein me in a little bit. I'm sure he'll have some stern words for me about the I guess rant is probably the best way to put it. Whatever happened there in that first part of the show. But again, I'm here to talk about basketball, right? Let's talk about the actual basketball, not nonsense that people do on their computers instead of hanging out with their friends. I think that the biggest thing that stood out from watching the Memphis Grizzlies defeat the Indiana Pacers was the willingness of Taylor Jenkins to adapt to a situation. It was the first time they had been home in a while. Again, the 5-game road trip, coinciding with the 5-game losing streak. The team comes back to Memphis, back to FedEx Forum, and they're struggling. The Pacers were up by as much as 19 points at stages in that game. And instead of lying down, the Grizzlies fought back. They didn't quit, which again is a testament to their tenacity and toughness and their way of viewing themselves as competitors. But something funny happened as the rest of the second half and Memphis chipped away at that Pacers lead. Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. played a lot of basketball. Ja Morant played 42 minutes total. He was only on the bench for 6 minutes. And I'm pretty sure most of that came, if not all, in the first half. Ja played almost the entire second half, if not the entire second half. Jaren Jackson Jr., who sure as heck looked like he was on a minute restriction every game, or almost every game. He was right around 30 minutes, 28 minutes, 29 minutes played. If Jaren Jackson Jr. is your best two-way player, which in my opinion he is, right? Ja Morant's their best overall player. But Jaren Jackson Jr. combining his offensive abilities with his defensive domination, according to the Reddit guy, he has 27 blocks a game, apparently, right? Being facetious. But Jaren has a remarkable impact on the game defensively, and he has an offensive ability to get to the basket, take advantage of mismatches. So in theory, Jackson Jr. is your second best player. Desmond Bane is very close behind that. And on any given night, Bane can be that number 2. What's the point I'm trying to make? Usually they're not playing Morant at 42 minutes, Jackson especially at 38 minutes. Jackson, his most minutes played in a game up until Sunday night was 33. So he blew by that number against the Pacers. And Ja Morant, again, he's played a little bit more, obviously, but 42 was a season high for him as well. So it was a team in the Grizzlies that were struggling, right? And those struggles continued. in this game. You look at the Grizzlies bench against the Pacers, -1 for Xavier Tillman, -2 for Jake LaRavia, -3 for Tyus Jones. And Jones played 30 minutes off the bench. So it's not like the reserves were helping build leads, except for maybe David Roddy at a +11. Ja Morant was +20 and Jaren Jackson Jr. was +19 when they were on the floor. So those two guys, again, single game plus minus is risky business to talk about. But it reinforced, again, using your eyes to watch a basketball game. The two best players on the floor played for the Memphis Grizzlies against the Pacers, and they didn't come off the floor very much, which is uncommon in terms of how Taylor Jenkins has run the rotations for this team. Minutes have been monitored, whether it's medical reasons, whether it's just trying to keep wear and tear off of their legs. They have not had dudes play that level of time consistently. Ja Morant being the one close to exception, but again, he's only played more than 40 minutes a few times this season. So it stood out to me that Jenkins in game was willing to say, we have to get this one. Who knows what will happen over the next couple of days if we fall to 0-6 in our last 6 and we lose this game at home against a Pacers team that didn't have Tyrese Halliburton, wasn't at full strength in their own right. Again, the Pacers are having a good season. They're in the playoff conversation. I think they fall to outside of the play-in after this loss. But the Pacers have been good this year. So it's possible they turn things around and get back into the swing over these next couple of games, or maybe they make some trades and blow it up because the Pacers were not supposed to be this good, right? Like Rick Carlisle, their coach, is overachieving with that crew. So I thought that it was good to see Jenkins call an audible, to use some football vernacular, to find a way to win that game when Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. were both playing at a high level, playing more minutes than they probably wanted those guys to play. But they needed the win. They needed the win because Memphis doesn't play again until Wednesday against the Portland Trailblazers. So maybe a day off here, a day of practice there. The vibe around the team will be much better over these next couple of days because the streak has been snapped. You lose games like that and people start asking questions. What kind of trade should be made? What is the coach doing? Let's look at these rotations. Let's try to figure out what the problem is, when in reality, the problem is they're the best rebuilding team in the NBA the last 10 years. They're still rebuilding. I've said that multiple times, and I'll continue to say it. The players clearly aren't rebuilding, and the coaches clearly aren't rebuilding. They're a contending team. They're one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the NBA. That's undisputed in terms of their record and in terms of just looking at how they play. They're one of the NBA's very best. The front office is still rebuilding in terms of how they have established this roster. One of the things that Memphis struggled with on the road trip, obviously injuries hurt this, but bench depth. You've got young guys that are playing a lot of meaningful minutes. Santi Aldama is still relatively inexperienced in the NBA. David Roddy, who had a good game against the Pacers, stepping back up in the absence of Desmond Bane and John Conchar. But again, he is not an experienced player. He's a rookie. So you look at that Memphis roster and you say Brandon Clark's a starter, Jaren Jackson Jr. starter, Zaire Williams, 21 years old, Ja and Jaren are 23. I think Clark is 25 or 26. Dylan Brooks is 27. Santi's in his early 20s. X is in his early to mid 20s. LaRavia, who played 5 minutes, is in his early 20s. Roddy's in his early 20s. Tyus Jones is around 27 or 28. So what are we talking about? What's the point? This team is extremely young. Extremely young. Tyus Jones is 26. He's younger than Dylan Brooks. Pardon me. Thank you to basketballreference.com for the clarification. So in that game against the Indiana Pacers, the oldest player that played for the Memphis Grizzlies was 27 years old, which is widely kind of seen as a player's prime around that time, the late 20s to early 30s is where a lot of players are seen as being in their prime. Not always. Some guys' primes come earlier, some a little bit later. But in this particular case, I think it's fair to say the average is around the age of 27. They have got one dude that's in that spot. That's Dylan Brooks. Brandon Clark's 26. Bane's 24. Tillman's 24. Bane didn't play. Morant's 23. Jackson Jr. is 23. Aldama's 22. Williams and Roddy are 21. LaRavia's 21. This is a rebuilding roster in terms of experience and age that is contending. That is a testament to the players. That is a testament to the coaches. Front office is very good at what they're doing. It's not even a judgment of them. It's just a statement of fact. At this point, don't be mad at young players for playing like young players. Young players are going to talk too much sometimes. Young players are going to not execute the way they should sometimes. And I think that's a lot of what we saw in the 5-game skid for Memphis. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out now that they've gotten that win going into that Portland game on Wednesday. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by TurboTax. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. You can show your eyes things that are not taxes. You can unpack a moving box of not taxes, taste not taxes, sing not taxes a lullaby. Hopefully, not taxes sleeps through the night this time. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring your taxes are done right, guaranteed, so you can relax. Feels good to be doing your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax, full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. We will come back and close out this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, talking about players that need to step up to keep these good vibes going. And hopefully Desmond Bane comes back soon. But if he doesn't, some others that need to continue their good runs of play next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, flying solo for this episode. DeMichael Cole of the Memphis Commercial Appeal, my co-host, will be back with me tomorrow. Very excited about that. Very excited about tomorrow's show. Looking ahead to the Blazers, looking back on things that have come. I'm sure we'll have a trade deadline show at some point, or what the Grizzlies should do. Should they make a trade? If they do, who should they try to trade for? We've talked about that some. But going a little bit more in depth on these off days makes a lot of sense. So I'm sure DeMichael will want to talk about that. If you follow my work, you know that I don't really want to talk about that because I don't think they're going to make a trade. But, I'll do my job. I'll bite. I enjoy creating hashtag content. So we got some good stuff to talk about over the next couple of days on Locked On Grizzlies. Hopefully you'll stick with us. But we'll close out this episode taking a look at a couple of players who have kind of found themselves back in the rotational mix due to injury. John Conchar being out, Desmond Bane being out, and hopefully the latter in particular comes back soon. He's missed a couple of games with a sore knee. The Grizzlies have a couple of days off now. They're off today. They're off Tuesday, going into a game on Wednesday. These 2 days off, I'm sure the Grizzlies will give them some time at somewhere to just kind of hang out with their families again, coming off of that 5-game road trip. But they'll practice, you'd think, either Monday or Tuesday, and they'll find themselves in a position to hopefully have a healthy Desmond Bane coming back into the fold. But regardless, there's a couple of guys who have taken advantage of the opportunity. We haven't mentioned Steven Adams and his injury on this episode yet. So there's a couple of guys who have done a good job helping Memphis find themselves and get back in the winning column with the Pacers game. The first one I'm going to talk about is Xavier Tillman. And X is a flawed player. DeMichael and I have talked about that numerous times, how he doesn't dominate the summer league when you would expect a player going into their third year should this past summer. Doesn't seem like he has a skill set that's really developed as a passer. He hasn't really added a ton of skills to his toolbox, so to speak. That's a little bit concerning for a player at this stage of his career. But in fairness to X, he did really well against the Pacers. He had 9 points, 11 rebounds, really strong on the glass. And that's one of the good things about Xavier Tillman. He, again, can't replace Steven Adams, but he tries to replicate him as best he can. In terms of his rebounding, he's a solid screener. He's one of the better screeners on the team outside of Adams. So obviously that helps Ja Morant in terms of his creativity and his ability to play. So Brandon Clark had foul trouble, was really efficient, 5 for 5 from the field, but Clark only played 18 minutes against Indiana because of those foul issues. Xavier Tillman had to step up. And in those minutes, X showed the capacity to do the things that he was asked to do in the playoffs last year and really have some minor success. Again, it doesn't make X a key cog moving forward. It doesn't mean he should not be discussed in trade rumors if they even come up. But it does mean that he is showing his value and what he brings to the table as someone that can fill in when Steven Adams is gone. He fills that void in terms of the screening and rebounding well when he's on. Another player coming back into the rotation that I was really excited to see have some success is somebody that I've been high on for a while, and that's David Roddy. He really struggled at times earlier in the season, and you know that people struggle with their patience nowadays in 2023, right? How come the rookie is not being a really good player right away? Everybody develops in different ways and in different stretches and different time frames. And Roddy has taken the opportunity to grow his game and physically improve. And he is in a place where he looks much more comfortable than he did before the season or at the start of the season. Imagine that. Rookie gets run and he feels better about playing in the National Basketball Association. Who'd have thunk it? He's 4 for 7 from the field against the Pacers, 1 for 3 from beyond the arc, grabs a few key rebounds, uses his body well. I've talked about on the show in the past wanting to see Roddy play some more small ball 5. That's a lot of what he did when he was in college, and he had some success with it. So I was hopeful that maybe with Steven Adams out, we'd see some tweaks and twists in that direction. We're not quite there yet, and we may never get there. But I do want Roddy to continue to be put in advantageous situations and not being forced to be something that he's not. We talked about that with Zaire Williams recently, too. The fact that, and I know that this has been talked about from DeMichael a ton, Zaire's pretty strong in the mid-range, right? We talked about that last week here on Locked On Grizzlies. And he's not given a ton of opportunity to get into those areas for his shot. He was 1 for 3, Zaire was, from beyond the arc, 3 for 6 overall. So that means he was 2 for 3 on his 2-point shots. And his 2-point shots, again, mid-range, rim, he's pretty efficient in those areas, one of the more efficient wings in the NBA. So allowing these guys to do what they do well and putting them in the best position to be successful, that needs to continue to be a focus as the trade deadline approaches and passes. If they decide to continue to prioritize internal development, which is what I think they're going to do, I don't envision them coming out and saying, we're going to go all in. That's just not been their MO. Their best players are 23 years old, 24 if you include Desmond Bane. They're still a year or two away from that prime window. They probably are holding on to some assets to get a little bit closer to that. That's the more likely outcome of all of this. And with that in mind, guys like David Roddy, guys like Xavier Tillman, they're going to continue to be asked to fill in injury spots, to fill in areas and be productive players that perhaps on a normal contending team, they wouldn't be asked to do. They wouldn't be asked to be those kinds of guys. Again, the players and coaches are doing a phenomenal job. And so is the front office. It's not necessarily a disconnect because I think everybody's on the same page, but the confusion comes when I say that the Grizzlies are rebuilding and you look at their standing in the Western Conference as the number 2 seed, something's not adding up. They are operating as a rebuilding franchise. They have not made that all-in move. They have not made a signing. They have not done a trade that has put them in a spot to sacrifice future flexibility cap-wise, future re-signings of current players, draft picks, obviously, which this team clearly values very much, and rightfully so. They're good at it. The front office is still operating in a rebuilding manner. The players and coaches are contending. And with that in mind, if they continue to prioritize that internal growth and development as opposed to bringing in outside help, the three-point shot's got to get better. It has to. Desmond Bane can only do so much. John Conchar can only do so much since he doesn't shoot the three. He might be good at it, but he refuses to shoot it, at least consistently. So Bane is not the sole answer there. The reserves have to get better in those spots in terms of converting those threes and creating offense for themselves. It can't just be Jaren and Ja going off for 27 and 28 points, 55 combined scoring points in a game where 112 is posted. David Roddy and Tyus Jones scored in double digits off the bench. That's important. And against the Timberwolves, that didn't happen. Santi Aldama had 5. X had 5. Jake LaRavia had 6. You had guys in spots that were not necessarily continually producing as reserves. Part of that gets fixed and rectified with healthy players. Bane and Adams come back. The rotation shores itself up a little bit. But you want to see continued growth when these guys get their opportunities. And it was good, especially from Roddy and from Tillman in particular. We did indeed see that in this game. And hopefully we'll continue to, because that's going to be how they find their way, not just winning one game, but winning multiple games, getting back on a positive streak, and even more important than winning streaks, just playing good basketball again. Because even though there were some close scorers out west, there were also some games that the Grizzlies just didn't look like themselves. And it was good to see in the second half against the Pacers, they got back to that. and Roddy and Tillman were pieces of that puzzle on that particular night. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen game-to-game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Again, next time we're together, we might be talking trades, myself and DeMichael. We hopefully won't be talking about that dumb Reddit post. DeMichael hasn't been on since then, so maybe he'll want to discuss it. I'll do my best to not rant and yell at you again. If you listen to the whole show, I apologize for yelling at you earlier. I'm just, annoyed that now people all of a sudden care to hate the Memphis Grizzlies. And now it's a problem that they have a player like Jaren Jackson Jr. And now they are trying to place shade in places that it doesn't belong. You want to say the Grizzlies talk too much? I think they talk too much sometimes. I understand that it's part of who they are as players, and I'm okay with it. It's what makes them good. That confidence, that swagger that I don't have in a similar way. And that's okay. It works for them. But sometimes that means you're going to get punched in the mouth and you kind of suck it up and bear it. But to again, the Reddit thing is just crazy to me. Like, come on. They spend so much money to make sure these numbers are right, except in the case of the Memphis Grizzlies. It's just ridiculous. So DeMichael might want to talk about that, and I'll let him do it, and I'll try not to rant and rave. Trade deadline's coming up, ways that Memphis can get better internally, all sorts of fun things we can talk about here as Locked On Grizzlies continues on Tuesday and beyond. Until next time, thank you so much for listening on any podcast format that you have. Continue to rate, review, subscribe. Check us out over on YouTube if you haven't already done so. Like, comment, review. Help us make Locked On Grizzlies an even bigger part of the NBA and Grizzlies content sphere. I am excited to be a part of Locked On. I know DeMichael is as well. The season, the trade deadline, all sorts of craziness coming. Stick with us. It's going to be fun. For DeMichael, hopefully tomorrow, probably tomorrow, well, I'll have him back. I'm Joe Mullinax. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Stay locked in. Until next time, this is Locked On Grizzlies.